And good morning. It's time for the Mike Hewitt Show, brought to you by Renegade River and Spring Lake. And here's your host, Mike Hewitt.
Good morning and happy tax day, everybody.
Oh, baby, yes. I don't know if you happened to hear, but Americans, earlier in the show we were talking about tax, though the show just previous years, talking Muskegon, and Americans pay more in taxes than they do in food, clothing, and housing combined.
Yep.
So I know taxes are boring. Certainly they're a painful conversation for anybody to have. But think of the time that you spend involved in spending on food, clothing, and housing. Think of the enjoyment. Think of what you get back. You get to live. Obviously, you need food. You need clothing. And if you were here in West Michigan over the winter, you certainly need housing. We don't realize, too many of us, that taxes take more of our income than those three very important necessities. So celebrate today if you got your taxes in, but don't celebrate too early, because Tax Freedom Day, the day where you finally start earning money that you're able to keep instead of giving it to the various government agencies, doesn't happen for another 9 days, April 24.
I got to tell you, Jim Riley, I am so glad you said that, because you saved me the stress of remembering which day it was. Because, listen, it's all nonsense. That's just simply not true. And let me tell you why. And in fact, we've talked about this on the air before. But if you sit and look at, I used a toaster once as an example in a political campaign. But any item that you want to purchase, any item, I don't care if it's a loaf of bread, a toaster, a car.
An Apple Watch?
An Apple Watch, I don't know why, but if you did, good for you. I sit back and I look at the items, all of the different all of the various corporations that were involved in producing those items. Take the toaster I used as an example. You got the spring company, you got the aluminum company, you got the assembly company, there's a plastics company, there's everyone's favorite, Monsanto's involved. All of these,
the trucking company, the advertising,
delivery, marketing,
sure,
salespeople, the retail end. Every one of those companies engaged in the production from beginning to end of the toaster were taxed outrageously, and it was all in there just like ragu. So you think you bought a $20 toaster. Truth is you bought a $3 toaster, and the difference went to all the levels of tax. People drive by a car dealership, just as an example.
Extremely good point.
It's just, let me tell you, you're driving, and I know this because I used to run dealerships, and it's the truth for all. So I'm only focusing on the businesses I ran. You driving on the road, minding your own business, and you pass ABC car dealership, new franchise store. You see the new lot, the used lot, and you're thinking, wow, that rich son of a gun, those liars, and all the things that people attach to that stigma from the 1950s. That dealership is probably paying in excess of $150,000 to $250,000 in just property tax. Just property tax.
Well, we know here in Muskegon County, one of the top taxpayers, it's certainly in the top 10, it's, I believe, in the top 2 or 3, is Myers. The three Myers stores in Muskegon County are among the top property taxpayers in the county.
And the progressive battle cry is good, make them pay, but they don't seem to get the fact that we're the ones paying it.
All they do is collect those taxes. We do pay it.
I just don't get it. People just don't seem to understand. These companies don't pay the tax, they're passing it on. It's in there just like ragu. And so the progressives clap like penguins with excitement because they punished that mean, evil company, and then they bought their product, because that's where you got to get the product from. They paid the tax.
So let's go back to clarify what you're saying. What I was referring to, and there's the Tax Foundation out there that comes up every year with this Tax Freedom Day, which is this year, according to them,
it's in the
April 24. Well, let me just get a little clarification. April 24th is Tax Freedom Day, and that's for all of the federal and the local taxes that you pay too, state and the school taxes and the rest of them. Now, you're saying, though, this is just the money that you pay out yourself. You're saying that there are additional taxes that you pay out to every single thing that you buy, every company that you buy anything from, service or product.
Listen,
you're paying those taxes also. And that's not part of this Tax Freedom Day.
People pay tax. That's the part that is just, it's so simple, so elementary, that I flatly cannot get my head around the idea of the progressive call to punish. People are who pay tax, and it's about 75% if you add it all up.
So if you're going to go out, as you said, let's try anything, but something nice and simple.
The $20 toaster, that's really a $3 toaster.
How about a toaster? And when you add all the various taxes, and again, like you said, think of all the things that are involved. It's not just the manufacturing of the toaster. It's the mining of the metal.
It's licensing. It's fees. It's tax.
It's transportation. It's hiring the artist to do the advertising for the advertising firm, and on and on and on. They all pay taxes.
You look at your pay stub and you see that you paid Social Security and FICO, and your company matched it. Well, that didn't just come out of their pocket because they're wonderful. It's added to the cost of production or whatever it is your company does. It's in there just like ragu.
Yeah.
I don't understand why people don't just grab a hold of the reins on this horse and bring it to a stop. I don't understand why. When you look at 75% taxation in total, wow, talk about slavery.
Well, there's an interesting, just a sidelight, which it maybe diverges as I am wont to do. But think about this. When we talk about the companies that do in fact pay taxes, in fact pay their fair share, certainly a company like Myers not only pays property taxes, but they also, because they make a profit, they pay income taxes and the like. Compare that with nonprofits, and my God, you got nonprofits even in this town. There's some movie theaters, not the cinema group, but others, nonprofit movie theaters. You've got in certain towns nonprofit restaurants. You've got all sorts of nonprofits. What do they share? Well, number one, they don't provide a profit, of course, and so they don't pay taxes on that profit. And in many, many cases, nonprofits do not even pay. Of course, they don't pay federal tax. They don't pay state income tax on the non-existent profits. They don't even pay property taxes.
You said it.
So you talk about paying your fair share and looking with the evil eye at the car companies and Myers and Apple Computer and the rest of them. How about these folks that are not paying anything? Is there a fair share involved?
The whole concept of fair share is about as anti-American as you can get. Because companies don't pay a fair share. They're not paying tax unless they lose money. Okay?
Well, what about those people who pay no tax? 40% of Americans pay no federal tax. 40% of those who file pay no tax and, for the most part, actually get money back from the federal.
I was reading some articles last night in preparation for today's show, and there was a lot of uber leftists. I don't mean your average Democrat, nice people, local folks. It's not who I'm talking about. The very uber left were having an absolute conniption fit because the tax loopholes are taken advantage of primarily by the top 20%. So I'm thinking, well, how shocking is that since the top 20% pay almost all the tax in terms of federal withhold or federal income tax? Or
top 20% of earners currently pay in federal income tax 84% of all federal income taxes collected from individuals.
Well, the graph that I'm using, that's actually a federal graph. Probably means it's a lie.
Well, no, they do. The government does provide some accurate services.
Very little, because their left hand can hardly ever find his right hand.
Just don't go there for health care.
And listen, when I'm saying it's not a conspiracy, it's incompetence. Having said all of that, the top 1%, according to this, pay 37% of the federal tax burden. The top 2 to 5% pay the next 22%. The top 5 to 10 pay 12%, and the top 25 to 10% pay the 16%. So in other words, if you're looking at the tax burden, the bottom half of income earners, and this is a really key thing, because this is set up to measure income earners. So we're talking about people that work and are paying federal tax, not the 47% that are not paying any federal tax whatsoever. And in fact, some of them are not only not paying tax, they're getting refunds on money they didn't pay in the
bottom
first place.
40% of filers actually get money back. And it's not a refund. They actually get money. They pay
It's a welfare check.
Federal tax. It's a welfare. It's a vote buying. Well, you could view it as a vote buying deal too if you're going to take that away.
So all of those arguments aside, the bottom 50% pay 2% of the tax. But the uber left are upset because most of the tax loopholes go to the people that actually pay the lion's share of the tax.
The bottom 52%?
Bottom 50% pay 2%
Okay.
of the tax.
Okay. That was a bit. You said the bottom 52%.
Oh,
the bottom.
If I said that, my error.
They pay essentially nothing. Yes. Well, that's again. That's the fairness, and this is a system which unfortunately, if in fact you are paying 84%. I mean, who cares about how you got to the 84%? Again, the top 20% wealthiest Americans pay 84% of all the taxes collected. Now, that is with all loopholes, so who cares? What loophole or not, can you imagine what they would be doing without the loopholes?
And that's what folks want to do, is they want to get rid of the loopholes. That's why they're grumbling about it.
Well, again, focusing on the loopholes misses the point that, I think it could possibly be argued when people like to use the term, are you paying your fair share, have the bottom 80% who are now paying only 16% of all taxes, federal taxes collected, are they paying their fair share? Are we going? If fair matters, if fair share is a concept that ought to be publicly discussed, should we not take a look at the 80% of Americans who are paying only 16% of the total amount collected?
That's one huge loophole.
That's a pretty big freaking loophole, buddy. You bet, Brian.
I mean, if you're running a business, wouldn't you look for ways of saving money? And the tax code is so complicated. You got to have these college-educated accountants to take care of everything.
Expensive, and as well they ought to be.
And why can't the tax code be simple and no loopholes? Why does it have to be such a convoluted process to get this done every year?
That's a great question.
It's the same reason, though, that people don't realize that they're paying all the rest of the taxes. These taxes were purposely designed to be hidden. They just were. Because the folks that enacted them...
they're not too hidden today. Everybody in the country is talking about the fact that today is tax day.
No, they're talking about that tax, but listen, when you do the math, I'm telling you that the combined of everything is approaching 75%. So the math that you and I are talking about, even though it's ginormous, is only is less than half of the total tax picture.
Well, there is a political party that is out there day in and day out. There is a political candidate, female, an older lady married to a kind of a sex pervert ex-president, who is running around saying,
golly, I wonder who he's talking about, Brian.
Well, they say it often enough, and Hillary Clinton just, I believe yesterday, in one of her 4 points that she mentioned, was she wants the wealthy to pay their fair share. Again, making those who aren't the low information voter, who don't understand what's going on, think that there is something going on, that these rich people are not paying their fair share, and something must be done to penalize them, again, for not paying their fair share.
When my dad was alive, for the last many years of his life, he had a poem, and I can't recite it, you'll be glad to know, but the poem hung on his refrigerator. It was about the man in the mirror, because inevitably you've got to answer to the man in the mirror. And so those folks that you're talking about that are grumbling because the tax loopholes actually go to the people that are paying the tax, they have to look in the mirror and recognize the fact that they're not paying any, and a fair number of them got a check back called a refund when they didn't pay anything in the first place.
Well,
I just, to me, when I sit and look at it, but listen, I don't want to get really far down. I couldn't avoid bantering that on tax day.
I think it's a very important point.
It's a huge point, because right now we've got tax debates going on all around us. We've got the big one coming up on May 5th that we talked about this morning briefly.
Big tax increase will be voted upon in about 3 weeks.
It's a monster.
Yep.
And you know what? The voter turnout rate should be 100%, and it will probably be less than 5%.
Well, we don't know.
Of the eligible voters. Well, we're going to find out. But listen, the real topic of today, and we're going to do it as we wander our way through, but we're probably going to bounce around a little bit. But I was reading a story about the free-range parents that had the government come seize their children again.
Okay, explain what free-range parents mean, because that's a term that I had never heard before. It's come up lately.
I had to look it up. Well, the left likes to label everything. And if they can turn whatever they've labeled into an acronym, that's all the better.
Well, that's a good point.
They just love it. I don't know why, but they love it.
But we communicate well. I mean, or we communicate when we have a name for a particular issue.
I always thought free range was a term assigned to chickens. You allowed your chickens to free range. Guinea hens are a free-ranging chicken.
And that's very popular among the environmentally sensitive and the PETA groups that don't want the chickens to be abused. So the concept of free range means you're going to let them, rather than have them cooped up in a coop, they're out there pecking away and eating whatever chickens may eat, with the, enjoying the beautiful sunshine and having all the free range. Now that term free range is used as a pejorative.
It's a negative.
In a way to demonize a parent, and of course maybe to arise sympathy from about these poor children who are now deemed to be free range. But explain what the new definition is.
Let me give you the two examples, and I'll start by the old thing that stories sell. When I was a kid, granted that was 1,000,000 years ago, but when I was a kid,
we had to worry about brontosauruses stepping on your kids back in those days.
It was a challenge back then.
Yes.
But listen, we lived out in the country, and that's, by the way, probably as part of this debate. Because a lot of these debates we have are really city mouse versus country mouse. I'm really convinced of that. Having said that, back when I was a kid, for my family, it was when the lights came on, you had to be in the house. That was the rule. But I didn't have to have a nanny follow me. I didn't have a GPS tracking device in my lunchbox. I was allowed to go visit this friend. I went to visit that friend. In fact, back then I had a little mini bike, little dinky Honda 50. It was the late 60s. And I would go all over within a reasoned area. And by now we call that free ranging. And these parents...
Okay, so in other words, allowing your children to go outside is now free range. But
right.
Again, there's a definition here, because if you let your children... Let's say your children are 5 years old.
Yeah.
And you live in, let's just say here in Muskegon. You live in downtown Muskegon.
Right.
If you let your children cross, go all the way over from downtown Muskegon and cross over Sherman Avenue or Apple Avenue into over the highway, and they're maybe 5-6 miles away, most people would say, well, that's not good parenting. 5-year-olds shouldn't be crossing highways of that sort.
But
So
in this case,
is that what happened here?
I think that what we need to really do is ratchet down the concept of what common sense is and how it applies here. Should a 4 or 5-year-old be crossing big highways and all that? Probably not.
I think
on the other hand,
most people would agree with that.
Yeah, if you're 8, 9, 10, 11 years old and you're going to go play ball with your friend, or you're a young lady and you're going to go down to 2 blocks away or 3 blocks away, whatever the circumstance of your community allows as good common sense. And I think it's a measure. It's a measure that I believe the parents ought to make and not the government. And that's kind of what we're talking about. In fact, one of the terms I looked up for this show was what the term ward of the state meant. And I thought, jeepers, are my children, when I was raising them, did I unwittingly, were my children wards of the state? And the answer is yeah, by definition, because the state can make all of these decisions. I don't think most parents think of the children that they're raising as ward of the state. But when the state can come in and say, listen, you let your kid wander too far, that, by definition, it sounds like the custodian parent is the state, not the parent.
Okay, but there's a specific issue that has just come up, an event where 2 children were picked up.
The same couple, second incident.
I understand, but
they've been under the microscope.
Try to focus on what just recently happened and explain the difference, because it is a little close. It's not as clear-cut as the 5-year-old crossing the highway or a 16-year-old going out. In this instance, this is in Montgomery County, Maryland, which is near Baltimore. A 10-year-old and his sister, who is 6. So this is a young person. They were stopped approximately 5 p.m. in the evening.
5 p.m.
By, interestingly, for those of us who kind of worry about crime, by police officers in 3 squad cars. 3 police cars filled. Who knows how many police officers were in each car? Maybe 10, because this is a big deal. Anyway, 3 squad cars pulled up because they were walking home. Now, at the time, they were really, I think, like a quarter mile from home. They were very, very close. The police interrogated the children. Now, these are 2, a 10-year-old and a 6-year-old, were walking home. 3 squad cars sent out. The police interrogated the children. Well, they were actually 3 blocks from their house, so probably not even a quarter mile. And then demanded that the children, remember, parents aren't around, demanded that the children get into the police cars, under the assurance that police would bring them home. Well, that sort of makes sense. Okay, if that's an issue, that's kind of what Andy Mayberry might have done back in the old days if there was a concern. Just take your kids home. That's not what happened. The kids were taken to the police station. They were confined. Actually, they were confined in the back of the car. Think about this now: 10-year-old and a 6-year-old. They were confined in the back of the car for 3 hours. During this time, now their parents, of course, were waiting for their kids to get home at this point. Their parents were not notified. Okay. No explanation to the children as to what they had done wrong. Certainly no contact whatsoever with really anybody, with the exception of the social service group in town. The children were not released until 10:30 that evening. Now, this, again, governments constantly tell us that they are very efficient. They're doing everything streamlined. They're doing everything correctly. Here we have these kids 5.5 hours in custody, did not get home until 11 o'clock that night. Kept from their parents over 6 hours without access to food. And now...
Parents are suing.
The parents are suing, but now the social services are trying to take the kids away from the parent because the parents had allowed this terrible behavior to happen. The behavior being defined as allowing their children to be out without a parent around.
Folks,
they had walked down about a mile away, by the way, to a park.
That's where they went the last time they were seized. Folks, we've got to go to a break. We're way over, but we will be back, and we'll seize some more liberty when we get back.
Be a survivor, not a statistic. Renegade River in Spring Lake has new and used handguns, hunting guns, sporting goods, and survival gear. Protect your rights and your freedom. Ask about their CPL classes. Renegade River, next to the police station at downtown Spring Lake.
We're back. You're listening to the Mike Hewitt Show. I am Mike Hewitt, in with Jim Riley. And Jim, listen, I got to tell you, if you left your kids in the car for 3.5 hours, they would be arresting you for child abandonment. And somehow this makes perfect sense.
But you can do it if you're a policeman.
To a government gone crazy. Listen, I don't have a.
That's a great point, Mike.
I don't have this big push against law enforcement. I really don't. But when you sit and think about the fact that they had 3 squad cars, then they get protective services involved, they leave these kids in the back of a squad car for 3.5 hours, and they think the parents are bad parents. These people are nuts by any measure. They're nuts.
Well, I think you can be confident and perhaps made more comfortable by this phrase.
I can't wait.
Investigators from Child Protective Services, as well as detectives from the Montgomery County Police.
I sure hope all those folks have a lot of acronyms at the end of their name.
Well, let me finish my point here, buddy. Investigators from Child Protective Services, as well as police detectives from the Montgomery County Police Special Victims Investigative Division.
Hope they were investigating the cop that left them in the car.
Continue to work together on this event. So think about this, folks. Next time you hear a millage or you hear a police officer or a social service employee from certainly Montgomery County, Maryland, saying, we need more money, this is where their focus appears to be.
Or you call the police and they tell you that you shouldn't expect a car anytime soon.
Or 3.
Because they're backed up for the next several hours while they incarcerate 6-year-olds.
It's just... Again, we can laugh because it's so absurd, but it is this type of governmental overreach that is happening by the hundreds of thousands, if not by the millions, every day in so many jurisdictions throughout the country. And you know this, that if it becomes commonplace accepted by folks who are listening to our show and others, that, wait a minute, no, a 10-year-old with his 6-year-old sister should not be without parental guidance, then all of a sudden we're going to be having rules made. You can be 112 yards from your home if you're 5. You can be 150 yards from your home if you're 6. And of course, people will then be tethered. They'll have maybe chips implanted so that if your child is clearly free-ranging that they can be incarcerated. Perhaps we'll need more cars and more back seats to throw these kids into prison, I suppose.
I just love the words they come up with, the free ranging. You picture a bunch of kids out in the field clucking and pecking for worms
or food because their parents aren't feeding them.
I got to tell you, we've truly got a government absolutely off the rails. When you sit in, and I'm listening to some congressman on the floor of the House of Representatives, and he's raging about some nonsensical bill and how it's only going to cost $61 million. So why is there even an argument over it? And again, I'm thinking, how many people's entire federal contribution went to add up? It's only $61 million. Let's just do it and stop arguing. That kind of logic is why we once again have the Soviet Union, and yes, I'll say that, not Russia, a reconstituted Soviet Union with nuclear submarines off of our Gulf Coast and our western coast, and you sit and look and say, this country is in some serious trouble. The old joke, Houston, we have a problem. We really have a problem.
Well,
we really do.
I don't think the Soviet Union was going to be sending 3 police cars to arrest, detain a 10-year-old.
You're right.
I do believe we're setting some new track records here in terms of idiocy of government.
You're right about that, but the connection that I'm making is that that's the same mentality that the Soviet Union held.
Oh, sure, yeah, the massive expansion.
Children belong to the state.
Yes,
everything
you bet.
belongs to the state, including your children. They are a ward of the state. They're under is a person who is under the legal protection of some part of the government.
Well,
that means everybody's a ward of the state.
Well, you know where this can get, and people say, well, we could never take the farther steps down the road. My golly, how much farther down the road can you get? And the situation here, too, is this. This is, as you had suggested, this is the second time that this family had been cited by governmental officials for violating some purely non-existent law.
You know the old saying, once a free ranger, always a free ranger.
Well, apparently these kids have survived so far, but if in fact there is you're going to allow social service folks and others to interpret various concepts, as opposed, there's no law here, then everyone is conceivably liable in violating the law, and their children can be picked up, and then the families can be penalized for whatever penalties out there. Think about in cities, terrible, destructive, horrible cities like the city of Detroit, where you have single parent families, pretty much the norm, where the children are not supervised in any way, shape, or form. Certainly in Montgomery County, they have cities like that. I believe Baltimore is in that same town. Are they going down there and picking up children that they see walking around? Are people making those phone calls, bringing in social services and the police? Of course they're not.
I got to tell you, this
is selective enforcement is what it is.
It isn't even enforcement, it's politics. This is all about politics. And one of the things we need to do as a society is to step back for a minute and ask ourselves where we want America to be in the next generation. And here's what I mean to say is that if you're a helicopter parent, meaning you're hovering over your child's every single decision and everything that they do, and you're standing outside the bathroom door with it cracked to make sure that there's not a problem while they go potty. Listen, we're raising a society of young people that need to stay on mommy and daddy's insurance until they're 26 versus being independent.
26-year-old children.
Yeah, that's what we're after. And I'm thinking, do we really want that? Or do we want to raise critical thinkers that are able to be self-sufficient and make good judgments because they've been allowed to make good judgments with some supervision from their parents over the course of their growing up age? I just look at the two paths that we have before us between the helicopter parent making sure that their child cannot make a decision on their own versus free rangers. And we've had an America that grew up under the concept of what they now call free range. And America was pretty good until Dr. Spock and all those goof wings started changing things.
Well, Dr. Spock didn't change anything. He made advice. He wrote a book, and parents picked up on it. You know, that's I can disagree with many of their decisions. And again, I'm not being a parent, but parents made that decision to follow Dr. Spock. His book was the biggest bestseller about child behavior that's ever happened.
And he was as wrong as rain.
And I would agree with that also.
Absolutely wrong, right down to his own family that self-destructed. Here's what I'm saying is that we've got to have critical thinkers, and the only way to have critical thinkers is to raise them. What's that? The old quote I'm forever trying to paraphrase about the philosophy in the classroom of one generation will be the philosophy of government in the next. So if we raise a bunch of children that are not capable of being able to be out of sight for a moment, then that's the future we're going to have as a society that absolutely is totally and completely dependent on government or something.
Taking this to the next step, which at this point I think is an absurd step, but certainly not out of the potential of what may happen. If, in fact, it is socially deemed and accepted by government and by parents and by voters and by Americans that your children should not be unsupervised up until who knows what age, maybe 26, unless there is an adult nearby, then does that not then lead to the fact that should we not have government employees working for the social service organizations be within those households, or if a parent's going to go to Myers, for instance, to go shopping.
Supervised parenting.
And exactly. And so have governmental employees to be sort of substitute parents. Think about being a single mother. Maybe you're a drug addict in Detroit, and you've got 6 kids, or you've got 2 kids or 1 kid. Why not have a governmental nanny who lives within your apartment who can take care of the kids when you're out dealing crack?
I got to tell you, when we come back from break, I'm going to do a whole bunch of talking in a real short period of time about single parenting. So I'm glad you brought that up, because when I look at the end of the stick they're wrestling with, the folks that are in question have a nice looking home. Evidently, they make a satisfactory, and people love this, middle class income. They look like regular people, for whatever that term now means. And so while we're arguing about whether this family of presumably good parents, from everything else I can see, other than the Montgomery Sheriff Department's engagement, these people appear to be good, here's a ugly word, a good traditional family. While we're worried about them, and all debating over whether it really takes 3 or maybe even 4 squad cars to arrest a 6 and a 10-year-old to incarcerate them in the back, we've got 47% of the babies in America being born to unwed mothers. We've got almost 50% of America's marriages ending in divorce. Then we've got parents in divorce that are having problem families, and so their answer to that is to turn their family-making decision over to an adversarial court system. Folks, I think that is about as broken thinking as you could possibly get. But we're going to go to break, and we'll pick up with that in just a minute.
Renegade River in Spring Lake wants to buy your used handguns and hunting guns. Renegade River, your hunting, camping, and survival store. Stop in and check out their new and used firearms, sporting goods, Army and Navy supplies, and survival gear. Downtown Spring Lake, next to the police station.
Welcome back to the Mike Hewitt Show. I'm Mike, in with Jim Riley, and boy, we're just bouncing from topic to topic. Listen, Jim.
Boy, that's new.
Yeah, I put on the show's Facebook page halfsies. Yes, I said halfsies. Of course, someone messaged me and said, "What the heck are you talking about?" So, and the reason I said that is that when I started looking at all the things in show prep, roughly half of the people in America pay all the tax. Roughly half of marriages end up in divorce.
Oh boy.
Roughly half the children are born to unwed mothers. And I thought, this is about halfsies. And it makes me look at society a little bit differently when I start looking at the math. And I hop from topic to topic and see it's roughly in the high 40s on all of these topics. And it starts making me scratch my head. Can this happen by happenstance? And I'm not a conspiratorialist, but when you start looking at all the percentage lining up in the high 40s, it's a head scratcher. Anyway, what I wanted to spend some time on this segment talking about is frankly divorce and how America's handling divorce. I've been divorced. I have children. In fact, I've been a custodial parent and a non-custodial parent. I am an advocate, by the way, I think it takes mothers and fathers to raise children, and it doesn't matter whether someone agrees with me. And yes, there's examples where there were children that were raised wonderfully in single-parent homes, and there's been circumstances throughout history that have caused one-parent homes to be a necessity and a reality, and everything's been fine. So please, folks, don't get angry with me. I'm not trying to paint with a broad brush. However, when I stand back and look at the statistics, I've talked about that on the show before, suicide rates, incarceration rates, drug use rates, runaway teenagers, teen pregnancies, the list is endless. In it specifically in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and even 90 percentile range attached to single-parent homes. So when and if you look at half of the people that are going to get married are going to get a divorce, most of those people that got a divorce are going to have children. And I said, well, okay, I guess that's the reality of our times. That's what everyone says. Oh, well, that's just the way it is, Mike. What concerns me, other than the fact that those statistics are to me, are not sustainable as a society, but what concerns me about them is what we're doing, how we're handling divorce. Well, you have two people that, for whatever reason, right or wrong, and I think, by the way, we get divorced in America too easy. I'm not looking for government intervention. I'm looking for people when they're going to get married, first off, to get married for the right reason, not because it's fun and it's romantic and all kinds of other novel and silly short-term reasons, but actually pause and get married for the right reason. By the way, not to get into faith, but those folks with faith, some kind of faith, have a much higher rate of marital success than those without. That's a statistical fact, so don't shoot at me.
If that's a statistical fact, shouldn't the government get involved and enforce the belief in something, which would then result in positive family outcomes?
See, the assumption with that is that the government either cares about a positive family outcome, or that the government isn't in fact in favor of single parenthood. I happen to believe that half the government is in favor of single parenthood, because all of the decisions that they make seem to cause it, welfare and etc.
Well, there's a huge bureaucracy that benefits from disjointed families.
Follow the money. But listen, here's where I want to go with this with a little bit of time we have left. So folks they're going to get a divorce, and for whatever reason, you can't stop one or both of them. Interesting fact, by the way, let me stop myself. 66% of the women are the ones that file for divorce in a marriage, unless you look at the states that have equal custody laws. Then it's real close to 50-50. There's that half number again. And I tell you that, folks, because first off, it's an interesting statistic. But aside from that...
Wait. What do you mean by equal custody laws? Yeah. Equal custody of the house, the boat, the car?
The children.
Oh, custody of the children. Okay.
Equal custody. For instance, in Michigan, the assumption seems to be, of course, everyone says this is not true. However, statistics say that the assumption is women are better at parenting, and that's the end of the story. It's overwhelmingly leaned towards women in terms of who's going to be granted custodial care. And listen, I'm not trying to take a position on that per se. However, I am advocating for equal custody because, like I said in the beginning of this rant, I am thoroughly convinced that for a child to have the most opportunity to grow up successfully, it takes both parents. It takes the role model of both. Nobody wants to think half of me is a piece of dirt. And a lot of times when you see divorce situations, you'll have a husband or wife, they've been together for a decade or 15 years or 8 years or 3 years or whatever the math is. And it's classic because they take their marital problems and they go to get a lawyer who's going to profit from their demise. And then the lawyer takes it to an adversarial system that, by the nature of how it operates, argues. It purposely seeks to argue. That's what court does. So there's nobody in the system that's actually an advocate of keeping the marriage together, saving the marriage, or seeking what's best for the children. It just isn't there.
Well, is there, okay, you're repeating, complaints that most people know. The statistics have been out there. Very few people are saying, hey, divorce is good. Most people agree it's not. Well, but is there an answer? Is there something government what do you suggest?
I got to tell you, I think it goes back to free-ranging kids versus helicoptering. I think it goes back to us right now drawing a line in the sand as society and say, you know what? We want our young people to be critical thinkers. We want our young people now.
Who's the we that would do this?
The we better be the people that are parents right now or grandparents.
Okay, but they're not making those decisions now. We all agree on that. So how would they go from not making the decisions to making wiser decisions?
I got to tell you, I'm hoping that all the little dinky radio shows across America at some point figure out that if we don't save the American family, nothing else we talk about matters.
Well, that would be a hope. I'd add one other thing. Right now, the federal government, along with many state and even county governments, are actually encouraging families, certainly starting with Democrat President Lyndon Johnson's Great Society. They are encouraging families to dissolve because if you are a single mother, you get money from the government. You get discounts on housing. You get free Medicare, Medicaid in many cases. In other words, you are incentivized, and your incentive in the form of money and other benefits rises as you have more children. Most of those incentives disappear once you get married. So if we're interested in reducing the number of single-parent families, maybe one way to get there would be to stop the incentive.
How about incentivizing staying together?
Well, one way or the other. But the point is, we're not doing what you're suggesting. We are doing the opposite. So there is a way that public policy, if you think this is worthy of public attention, we could change public policy from incentivizing with cash and other benefits, Obama phones and who knows what other things, food stamps and the like. We could stop subsidizing a behavior that most people agree is a behavior that we ought to encourage not to happen, and go the other way around. Now, of course, there are plenty of folks that would be on the other side of this, the entire bureaucracy.
That is cruel to cut people off from their free money.
Well,
how can you do that?
Well, you know what? It would be cruel to a certain extent. Absolutely.
My dad used to say, if you give a guy $5 every week for no reason, and then all of a sudden you miss a week, you're going to be a son of a gun.
Yeah, isn't that that's a great one?
And it's
you're getting a gift every week for nothing, and then you stop giving the gift. All of a sudden, you're a bad guy.
Listen, if you talk LBJ is not the catapult, but to your point, he was one of the primary catapults or engineers of the society that we're living in now. He really was. So we have most of our policies stemming from a brief administration that was led by a man that would sit on the pot and call his secretary in to give her dictation. And you think, this guy was a sick, twisted man, and there's just endless examples of how absolutely off the rails that guy was mentally. And we've got most of our domestic policy hanging off of his crazy uber leftism. That's nuts to me. Well, especially when you've got 50 years of history to look back and say, that ain't working so well. But
well, not too many people are actually even saying what you're saying, that it isn't working too well.
But it ain't working well. It's just not working well.
Interestingly, the only people who are really coming out publicly and saying it's not working too well are those social service bureaucrats who are saying, if you just give us some more money, it will work well.
More money, more money, more money. But you know what? If you go back to, and in fact, I talked about it on the episode that I did the State of the Union on, and I talked about Dan Quayle when he got into a spat with Murphy Brown. And at that point in time, single unwed mothers were having birth rates, seems like it was in the 30-ish%.
Yeah, it was socially it wasn't cool to be a single mom back in those days.
In 1955, it was in the teens. Now it's at 47%. And listen, I understand that sometimes that's just the reality of life. But it cannot be the foundation for a society, because it will tip over.
Well, I really like your comment about, how do we, or your answer in response to my question, how do we fix it? Having conversation, we should be able to talk about this.
Let me tell you, the first thing we need to do, in my view, is we need to, to your point, we need to be able to talk about it, because people have got to start thinking, is the American family really in free fall? Right now, maybe I'm the Lone Ranger. I really believe the American family is in free fall, and that
statistics bear you out,
and that is the foundation of America. So we need to first talk about it. But then the next thing, and you asked it very wisely, is how do we change it?
Love that.
That's scary. It's the only time in all the hours you've been on this show. Listen, so when I look at it, the only way to change it is to change who the heck we're electing. We just got to change who the heck we're electing.
Or keep electing take a little more time and punish those who betray us, be they Republican or Democrat or third party.
But both parties, because it's not a party thing to me. To me, it's an electorate thing. It's the voters who are saying, jeepers, I want more money. I want free money. I want all of these things. But there's a price tied to everything, folks. Yes. Everything has a price. And, the Book of Unintended Consequences, it's about 9 inches thick. If it told all of the unintended consequences from government decision, it would stack from the floor to the ceiling. It would be unreadable. It would almost look like Obamacare.
Well, government is nothing if not unintended consequences. And again, on tax day, we're talking about that. We keep being told that if people just pay a little bit more, we can balance our budget. We'll take care of efficient deployment of scarce resources like the police and fire and social services and things of that sort. Interestingly, today, just before we got on the show, the city of Muskegon Heights announced that because they lost most of their customer base for the water, they're going to be cutting back employees and going on some type of automated system for the few remaining customers of their water system. There are consequences to poor government decisions and poor voting decisions who bring those types of people into power.
Can't they sell the water to California?
Perhaps, but if they're going to cut back, maybe that water won't be kind of water you want to get.
I don't think I want to sell water to California. Those folks choose to live in the middle of the desert. And you go, okay.
Yeah, but you buy their fruit and vegetables.
Are you really surprised that they could move a little bit further in? Okay, and because I sit and I look and say, are you really, really shocked that there's no water in the middle of the desert? No kidding. You go to Lake Mead and look at the water level drop. That's not global warming. That's a lot of people sucking up water.
Well, there's any number of things that are involved there, you bet.
Larry Hausman, our friend Larry Hausman, messages on Facebook to say, good show, guys. Thanks, Larry.
He's a very wise man.
He's a good guy.
And a tremendous critic of high-quality radio.
Right now he's thinking, I like the show, but why does he keep having that Jim guy on?
I think about that myself, as a matter of fact.
So anyway, that's my point. We got to save America, and the only way we're going to do that is to actually start looking at this stuff, because I think it's easy to ignore this, because none of it is not pretty topics. Start looking at divorce rates and how to save marriages and why people get married, divorce court, all of those things. In fact, speaking of divorce court, before I run out of time, one of the things that I think would save the future generations of America is to put on the high school curriculum that young people should spend at least 1 week, and preferably an entire month, sitting in either prosecutorial or civil court and watch court proceedings, because I still maintain that our judiciary is the most broken branch of government and nobody's looking at it. We all convince ourselves we got the best judiciary in America.
I think it's a great idea.
And
I think it's a fabulous idea.
And the reality of it is this is off the rails. If you sat down with any of our founding fathers and said, we're going to give you the results of that, we're going to sentence this guy. We just found him guilty after only 3 years, and we're going to get to sentencing somewhere next year. The founders would go, what? That's a speedy trial? What are you guys, insane? And the lawyer said, yeah, but you know how much money we make?
Knowledge is good.
Knowledge is good. Absolutely good. Folks, if you want to see any of the back shows of this, you can go to the MikeHewittShow.com, or you can find the Mike Hewitt Show on Facebook at Facebook.com/The Mike Hewitt Show. And Jim, you're going to be on next week?
Sure. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, and I think next week we were hoping to have Shturko Abbas on, but he told us he was in meetings. He's the president of the Kurdish National Assembly of Syria, but he will be on next Wednesday with us, folks. We will look forward to seeing you then. In the meantime, if you got topics you want to hear, see us on Facebook.
Be a survivor, not a statistic. Renegade River in Spring Lake has new and used handguns, hunting guns, sporting goods, and survival gear. Protect your rights and your freedom. Ask about their CPL classes. Renegade River, next to the police station in downtown Spring Lake.